Hello and welcome to the Wanderlust Herbal podcast with me, Fiona Morris. And today I have a lovely friend and plant inspired guest who is Fay Johnstone, who is coming to us from Scotland. Hi, Fay.
Hi Fiona, it's lovely to chat to you. Hi everyone.
You are an author, plant whisperer, plant spirit guide, a creative shamanic practitioner, and a Reiki and Qi Gong teacher, and I'm sure a lot more. You have been on Substack more of late, and you were mentioning a plant circle group that you have just recently finished working with on that. And I have known you for a few years now. We met in Scotland, and you have been going through a bit of a winding journey, inspired by plants and following your heart, very much drawn to working with plants in different ways. And it's been really fascinating to see how things are evolving for you lately, because when I first met, you weren't in the place where you are now, which is this amazing garden in Scotland, which is quite unique and wonderful from what I understand. And I look forward to visiting you there at some point over the summer, I hope. Yeah, you've had quite a winding journey. And from looking at your website earlier, I saw that part of your journey with plants flourished in a very small apartment in Paris. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
You're mentioning a tiny little garden in Paris, and that you've gone from there to Canada and back to Scotland and so on. So, yeah, so this, I don't know this part of your life. So I'm really curious about how you ended up living in Paris and how these little seeds of your plant journey started to germinate and flourish from your little window box in Paris. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that was a really big instigator for me. So I'll take you back because I think when you introduced, I've been practicing Reiki and my shamanic work for over 20 years, and people assume that oh yeah, you're all sorted. You've always been like that. Actually no, I came from a very academic family. I did all those. I ticked all the boxes that the good girl, thought she ought to do. So I studied really hard at school, and I always handed my homework in on time, and all those things.
Right.
Very, very much the good girl, studying hard, trying to please her parents and please other people, and all that sort of thing. But there were some really significant, sort of, if you like, drops along the way, because I've always been if you like, well, I started to get interested in, things like auras and psychic developments and all of those little tiny pieces of the puzzle. But before the apartment in Paris, I had an experience. So I was really fortunate. I studied Spanish was one of the subjects that I studied. And actually, so when I was 20 years old, I found myself in Ecuador, and I was
Mhm.
living in Ecuador as a student. And
Mm.
this was where, in a sense, my tightly bound upbringing started to unravel, if you like, because I ended up very by chance, or you could say now, oh yes, that's a very nice synchronistic opportunity to expand and grow that was set up by the universe or my higher self. Anyway, I ended up at a shamanic ceremony because my friend in Quito, where I was living, I said to him one day, oh, what are you up to this evening? And he said, oh, I'm actually going to a ceremony with my shaman. And he actually said this, and I'm like, what? For me, I wasn't, if you like, following any type of spiritual path. I didn't know what that meant.
Mhm.
And I said, oh, that sounds kind of fun. Can I come? Like you would say for coming to join someone for a yoga class or a tennis match or something. And he went, I don't know. I'll have to ask him. And actually, so that was a very significant, if you like, point of expansion for me. And these days, like talking about it these days, well, we're a bit more used to these type of ceremonies happening and Westerners joining into perhaps an indigenous ceremony, etc. But it wasn't really like that back then. So it was really unusual for a woman to be there. It was very unusual I was the first white person that had ever been in ceremony with this
Wow.
practitioner.
Mhm.
And actually, I know in my first book, which is called Plants That Speak, Souls That Sing, I do mention it. And I won't go into details with it now because, in a sense, the detail of ceremony is so special for somebody, and it doesn't really help people to hear the story.
Mhm.
But that for
Yeah.
me, it was a very significant, and there were obviously many, many plants involved in that,
Yes.
visionary experience, and so on. And I really learned. I learned when I was in South America, that this concept of Pachamama and blessing the earth. And that was the
Mhm.
first time that had ever even occurred to me. And it was very life-changing. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, and this is kind of what happens when we have these amazing peak experiences, if we come back to an environment, if we go back to our life, like if you've been traveling, or you've been on an amazing yoga retreat, all these kind of things, or even
Yeah.
if go to an ayahuasca ceremony, which happens that people like to go to ayahuasca ceremonies and stuff in the Amazon, and you come
Mhm.
back, and if you come back to an environment which isn't supporting this newly expanded version of you, there's
Mhm.
no way for you to integrate it. So actually, even though I had this incredible experience and I saw so many visions, and I started to realize, wow, my version of reality, this is not actually reality. There's another reality.
Mhm.
I came back to finishing my final years at university, and then going into our idea, well, not an idea, it's this reality of, well, you need to get a job, you need to do all the things. And actually, so I sort of got pigeonholed, even though I'd had this amazing experience. It kind of fizzled away because there wasn't anything that would keep it going for me. There wasn't any sort of supportive groups like that, because we're talking about, I mean, this is when I was 20. This is quite a long time ago. I won't reveal my age, but it was quite a long time ago, in
Yeah.
the 90s. And so fortunately, I found Reiki, and
Mhm.
I was attuned to Reiki in 2000. And again, this was another sort of a little breadcrumb that the universe is saying, come on, explore
Mhm.
yourself, expand. There's more to life than this. Find out a little bit more about yourself. And it was actually this combination of Reiki. It was Reiki in a sense, that and journaling and self-reflection, that got the plants to kind of go, hey, come on, Faye, you want to. And I'm going to actually give credit to Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way. So
Oh, love.
that book has always been a great inspiration for me, and it
Mhm.
really did change my life. And whenever I'm at a crossroads now of thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure where I'm headed, I go back to The Artist's Way, and those morning pages that, if you like, Julia prescribes in The Artist's Way, were for me the instigator when I lived back in Paris, which is
Mhm.
what your question was.
Yeah.
I started to sort of find myself really recognizing plants, and I would be writing about them. And the
Mhm.
other thing we had to do as part of the Artist's Way was to take yourself on artist dates. And obviously, living in Paris, you're not short of places, or any city, you're not short of places to take yourself to have a beautiful experience. But I found myself just migrating to kind of areas where there were beautiful plants. And one day in particular, I ended up buying as many plants as I could possibly take home with me, a carry, and to take home with me. And I was kind of like, why have I done this? What is going on here? Because I really was one of those people who didn't know. I couldn't
Mhm.
tell you the name of flowers. We always had flowers in our office. And
Right.
my boss would be like, oh yeah, but there's the gladioli, and those are the da, 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 and Faye, we need to get some. I knew what roses were, and that was it.
Yeah.
And this was a real opening for me. And actually, it was this realization. It was like I always talk about plants really helping align us with our true nature, and that's how
Mhm.
the inspiration for my work now.
Yeah.
And really, that is what it was like. They were calling out to me saying, hello, this isn't really you. And then it was that realization of that I was working in a corporate job, and I was,
Mhm.
again, ticked all the boxes, had the high heels and the handbags and the suits, and was going to the meetings and doing all the things that somebody in their 20s, I thought, this was it, I'm great, I'm doing the thing. And actually inside, I was actually really unhappy. And so in a sense, the plants then took me back. They took me back uh, to the UK, and I ended up sort of realizing I don't want to work in a city. I just want to work in the suburbs. I want to work in a nice small village outside of the city, and get a job which is less stressful, and so it's all about, for me, taking, having a sort of, I started to question things more, and I started to make different decisions, and then I started to learn about herbal medicine, and I started to work for a company that was working in conservation, which,
Mm.
lucky for me, took me to the Amazon again. It
Wow.
took me to South Africa, to work on game reserves and things. So it was really, again, the plants helping me, and Reiki as well, because Reiki is, a
Mm.
really important sort of part of my energy practice and self-development kind of tool. But it really was the plants leading the way, and they really have continued to lead, because I moved in 2010, myself and my partner, we moved to Canada, and we were like, didn't really know what we were doing, but we had this desire to expand and to grow, and to get a little bit more. We, in the UK, I had my own little plot of growing, vegetables, which we call it in the allotment. We call it, in the UK, we call it an allotment, because generally our gardens are quite small. And then
Mhm.
we moved to Canada, and we started a flower and herb farm, and yeah, and that's where it all, again, the plants just didn't want to leave me alone,
Yeah.
and they still
Wow.
don't.
Such a winding journey you've been on from South, well, probably starting off in the UK. Is that where you were doing
Yeah.
your studies initially, and then you did a year in Ecuador, came back, went to France, and then back to the UK, over to Nova Scotia in Canada. So that's a really interesting chapter in your life, and I am assuming is where you really kind of got to know plants in a very intimate way. Having you were working on a flower farm, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, and this is what I will always say, and I'm sure you would say the same to clients and students. If you want to know a plant, then if you grow it from seed, or if you know that plant intimately by sitting with it and caring for it and watching it grow throughout all seasons, then you just, I mean, for us, yeah, growing these flowers, they were all our little babies, and you get to know what a plant looks like when it's tiny, really, really tiny, when it's kind of putting up its first fully formed leaves. It's just, so you have quite an intimate experience with them. And as well as then, I got very excited about having all these herbs and flowers at my disposal. And I was like, right, I'm going to make tinctures and potions and salves and flower essences. And, it was just so plant filled. And I have to say, I do miss those days very much, because we were so busy working on the farm and working with the plants and growing food and growing the flowers, that actually, and this is going back a while, we didn't really do social media. I mean, at the time, neither of us had a mobile phone. I mean, this is just insane, because it actually really was only in like 2010. And, people had mobile phones. We just didn't. And I remember writing a blog, and that was all we did. I wrote a blog once a month that sort of said, these are the flowers that are growing. And it was very relaxed. And
Mhm.
it does make me realize that much of our time is used up. It's got sort of eaten away by the scrolling and the posting. And it's really interesting that so I just had to throw that in, because it's something that I'm really aware of, because there's so much beauty in just being away from that computer screen. And that really helped me be really present with what was around me, and what was around me was the plants. And so that is how, we can much more easily slip into that space to really sort of receive the communication that is coming from them, and the information that flows between our energy fields.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's so rapid, isn't it? How quickly social media and our sort of new age of technology has taken over, and certainly both of us working intimately with plants in different and creative ways. Um, it's it's really important, obviously, that for nature to have a role in kind of bringing us back out of there, because we kind of gone at this exponential speed of um, connecting to people in this widespread ease of accessing knowledge at our fingertips. Just even just even planning trips or wanting to go somewhere, you just need to have the thought, and then suddenly you can go onto Google and do a whole itinerary and connect with like 10 people in another part of the world who you could visit or travel, and it's mind-boggling. And I feel like there's a big role that nature has to kind of bring the balance back. And I know that you have an interest in astrology as well. We both share that. And recently, Jupiter went into Gemini. I think it's just been in this past week. So, Jupiter, you mentioned the word expansion. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, and kind of reaching out. Whereas Gemini, which is the polar opposite of Sagittarius, who has its ruler as Jupiter. So Gemini is much more into the minutiae, but also very much obsessed with knowledge and information. So we've got those two polar opposites merging at the moment, which feels like a real, I'm not really sure how to describe it because we're just kind of entering this period of time right now, but it's certainly almost a culmination of this past, say, 15, 20 years where technology has just exploded. And in some ways, people like you and I who have an interest in connecting with people and places around the world, it has really facilitated this connection with nature globally, which is obviously something that 50 years ago wasn't a possibility. So we're living this quite unique experience in our life of being able to immerse ourselves in plant worlds of different kinds in different parts of the world. So that's quite unique and special. I'm very privileged, I feel, and I'm sure you do too. Which brings me to where you are living now, because whereas in the past you've gone to different places, you're now back in the UK, but you're in this really special, you've become a custodian of a really special garden, which actually brings the world of plants, as in plants from all over the globe, right to your doorstep, because it was previously a botanical garden. Can you share a little bit more about what's brought you to this place, and a little bit more about some of the delights of this new garden that you have found yourself in?
Oh, I'd love to. And before though, I just want to preface this by saying I know there might be lots of people listening who are also looking for their own special place, their own kind of plot of land, or their tiny patch where they can grow marigolds or potatoes or whatever it is. And I just want to say that I really feel that the land kind of calls to us and helps us find each other. That happened to me in Canada. It happened to me when we came back to Scotland, but it took us several years to find our spot. So I feel like you do need patience when you're kind of finding your spot, and lots of faith, and it definitely happens. And so it happened for me here, and I'm in the Kingdom of Fife, which is just kind of to the north of Edinburgh for people in Scotland, for people kind of wanting to locate it. And it's also on the sea, which is quite a special location as well. And there's lots of history in this area, particularly connected to witches, actually. So that's another factor. I'm thinking, oh, is this what draws me here? And so where I am, it's actually an old kind of walled garden space, which means that in the sort of 18th century, it was used originally for growing vegetables for a large household. And there was like this garden, and our neighboring garden was used as this sort of place where vegetables and fruits and flowers would all be grown for the very big house, for the rich people up the road in the big house. So what's really interesting is when I sit in my front room of my house in this cottage, I think, wow, for centuries, people have been sat like on a sofa like this, or a comfy seat, with weary bones and muscles like mine, because they have been toiling in the garden and growing the plants that need growing. So it's wonderful when you come to places, particularly the places that have been cultivated in a sense for so long, because there is this connection between the human and the land always. And so here what's happened is there was the lady who was here before us was a botanist, and she used this as her last legacy, her final legacy, if you like, for putting together what she called a Southern Hemisphere garden. And you might think, hang on a sec, you're in Scotland, that's not quite Southern Hemisphere. But what we have is a selection of plants which are from South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and also a specific area of Patagonia from South America. So it's a really interesting combination of plants which you wouldn't really expect to see in Scotland, and so you can feel like you're really transported to these different areas. It's a really sort of fascinating combination. But also what I found when we moved here is, because some of the plants weren't very familiar to me, I didn't feel that heart connection that I feel, for example, having grown up in the UK, for example, when I see like a hawthorn tree or an oak tree, I just feel so aligned with that plant, because it's like, and the beech trees especially, I feel really aligned, like that feels like part of my heritage, it's in my bones. And so actually there were many plants in the garden that I was like, not only did I not know perhaps what it was, the classification, the name of it, or the species, but it didn't necessarily have that heart connection with me, because it was like a complete stranger to me. So there's been this real learning curve of kind of getting to know the plants in a garden, and then almost working it out. And I feel really like this is where plants mirror us, and they, the nature, they are showing us the way. And it's really, what I found moving to this garden is, there were many people who knew about this garden. It had been a show garden. The lady used to show people around the garden and show off this, collection of these special plants that she had. And there was a certain pressure there to kind of keep that, maintain that, or to kind of build on that story. And actually, after being here for about 18 months, we were realized, what, this is actually time for a new story. And and shifting sort of the energy of the garden into something that we are creating with the garden, not a story necessarily that someone else has created with plants, which are kind of, some of them are definitely on the edge of their comfort zone, shall we say. And we've had a lot of change in climate with here in the UK, with very, very damp kind of spells, which you can imagine plants from the southern hemisphere just don't really like. So it's been really interesting, almost like having the courage to go, what, this doesn't really work. We need to make it work for us. We need to introduce the plants that we feel really aligned with. And especially for me, that also comes down to food. I really feel like we always need to be, if you've got land, I feel like you have an obligation to grow food. And so, so we've been making changes, with so that we can sort of maintain it in a way that is sustainable, because I think a lot of these gardens that garden was built with two gardeners, full-time gardeners working in that garden. And we don't have full-time gardeners because we're it. And we actually have businesses to run and lives to lead outside the garden. So I feel that, it's just, for me, the plants, it's about sustainability and how is this working for me. That's kind of been one of our that we're constantly going backwards and forwards with.
Sounds really quite an interesting and unique process to be living in that place that you've sort of inherited. Like, as you say, this woman's legacy was to leave this behind, and obviously she was from a different generation and a different age and different history, and so you've kind of got this challenge of sort of carrying it on and being a custodian for it, but equally, as you say, making your own. And I love that, growing your own food and using it for very practical purposes is something that's important to you, and so important, I think, to promote in today's world where we have become disconnected from the land in general. Obviously, there are people who are lucky enough to have access to land, but the majority of us don't. And so it's, this idea of having a piece of land and learning how to grow food that you can actually eat. And of course, being a herbalist myself, medicine, of course, and things that you can heal yourself well and enhance your diet with to optimize your energy. And I would also imagine sort of things that really flourish locally, whereas a lot of the things that were brought into your garden or things from far away. And so with you being there, it's almost like this quite unusual environment which you're now kind of reclaiming in some way. I'm guessing, does it feel like that?
Yeah. I feel like you summed that up really well, Fiona, actually. And one of the questions that I always like to ask, and everybody listening can do this at home if you have a small, even if you have a little terrace or a tiny back garden, or if you've got a massive one, wonderful. But one of the questions I always ask, and you can ask, and I tend to ask this when I'm doing my shamanic journey process or sitting in a meditation. So you can just ask it, you can walk around your garden space and you can ask, what is needed here? And then just wait and receive a response, because there will be a response that comes. And this is, in a sense, what we're always asking, because the problem is the disconnect with the humans, if you like, and the plant world comes really because we have for many generations thought that we could dominate nature. We think we're kind of better than nature. We think it's completely fine. Oh, we'll just astroturf this. We'll just knock down those trees because I want to put a car park there. We kind of, that's how we've been proceeding. So it's not surprising that we have become really disconnected from our green cousins, if you like. And so just to kind of make friends again by asking, what is needed here? How can I help you? And that's where these little downloads of information or insights can come. But and sometimes they can come really quickly, like lightning. But actually, I find for me with gardens, they really teach us patience. And I think this is the 6th summer we've been here. And it's only this year I suddenly feel, oh yeah, I feel like I'm getting the energy of the garden now. I feel like we're kind of starting to flow together. So it's really interesting. It's not for me, things don't necessarily happen quickly with the garden space. It's just patience and kindness and appreciation and listening, lots of listening when we're in the garden. But yeah, food's a big one. Food's a big one for me.
Yeah. And just hearing you describe all that, I'm feeling this sort of real grounding and slowing down, and that the idea of it taking 6 years for you to kind of start to really land there. In contrast to that idea of this explosion of information and this connection, sort of, you were saying you are one of the last people to get a mobile phone. I really relate to that. Maybe got mine a little bit sooner than yours, but I resisted it for the longest time. And but ironically now, I found myself really embracing technology once I kind of found my feet with it. And one of the things that I do love about it is our ability to connect. And obviously, being a multicultural person myself, having been born in Indonesia, I've got an Indonesian mum and a Scottish dad, and have lived in both. I really relate to people who have got multicultural backgrounds and have traveled to different places, and it's a sort of new subbreed, I suppose, of humanity that have been able to connect and explore the globe in this very weird and wonderful way. And with that can bring a lot of disconnect from the land, because you can travel across the globe in less than 24 hours, and that can feel quite jarring. So yeah, I feel like a walking paradox sometimes, and like you, having this very strong connection to nature, but equally this very strong desire to travel at different points in our lives, and sometimes there'll be quite a lot of travel, and other times, like yourself, you've had 6 years to kind of really drop into where you are. And it's interesting, that idea of creating that little tiny garden in your in your window box in Paris, because I've been living with my mom essentially, and she and my dad, who passed away last year, but they live in apartments in Indonesia and in Malaysia. It's a bit of a long story, I won't go into that, but I had a really strong desire to, like yourself, to buy a whole bunch of plants and put them on the little balcony that my parents have. But it wasn't my own home, and my mom is very adamant that she's not a green thumb, and I do occasionally buy her plants. I don't know if it's for her, more for my own my own desire to be close to a green cousin, as you put it, which I love. But when I go away, it gets horribly neglected. And then I feel it's like that thing about a pet is for life, not just for Christmas. And in the same way with plants, it feels really sad to buy or get one for somebody who will then neglect it. Although on the other hand, I think it is also good to encourage people to connect with plants. And plants are very forgiving, aren't they, despite the fact that we neglect them so badly. We can be quite ignorant and rough on the lands that we have access to, and once we turn our attention back to them, they give back in such amazing, wonderful ways. Just kind of sharing a little bit about that, and lamenting a little bit that I don't have a little patch myself. I think, well, that's maybe something that I just want to ask you, maybe finish off with, is when you are in transition, like how do you bring a little, or how do you bring a little bit of plant life? Because obviously you can't really put a plant in a suitcase, and in fact, you'll probably get it confiscated from you. Although I do bring teas and little bottled essences of plants along with me. But what is your sort of go-to travel companion when it comes to plants? How do you bring the essence of plants with you when you're on your travels?
I think, yeah, this is a really great question, actually. And yeah, like you, I always have sort of tinctures or flower essences, particularly. I'm just actually looking on my desk, because I usually have something on my desk which is plant. Oh no, that's a pendulum. I thought I had a bit of, because I've actually always I've got a flower crown, but that's not a real. I'm just looking on it. So there's always something.
Yeah.
But I actually really love like aromatherapy. I love aromas like that. That really gets me every time. So sort of perfume, any scent will help me instantly bring a plant in, basically. But I mean, I feel that if we have a connection with the plant, we can call it in. We don't have to have it with us. I mean, this is why, in a sense, plants are just so fabulous, a medium, if you like, to help us connect and heal and work through our stuff with, because we can meet them in physicality. We could go and sit with a tree, we can hug it, we can touch it, we can draw it, we can paint it, we can make a poem with it, we can sing to it, we can partner with it, we can make a herbal tea from it, if it's a medicinal plant or a tincture, or if it's an aromatic plant, we can crush it up and smell the aromas. So there are just so many different ways, and really we can, if we've made a connection, one thing I love to get people to do, and people listening can do this, just think of those plants that have touched you throughout your life. And I know for me, I can go instantly to a horse chestnut tree that me and my neighbor used to climb in when we were tiny girls. I can remember the first time that somebody bought me roses. And those are the connections that we have in our energy field, in our memories. And so that is how we can invoke them. So we can invoke, and often when there are certain healings that I will do in my client work, and when I start drumming, I am instantly taken to a certain place. There were two maple trees outside my house in Canada. I used to call them the twins, and they have a certain sort of energy to them, if you like, and so they come in to help me with certain healings. And sometimes if I start drumming and I'm taken there, it's like, oh, okay, I'll let you do your thing. I know what this is about. They're in safe hands with you. So it's really interesting how plants are sort of wrapped around us. If we've had a peak experience or just a simply lovely experience, like thinking of maybe a place you used to go and picnic with your family by the seaside, just so I think that plants, if they have come into our heart, if they've altered us in some way, then we can always invoke them. We don't have to have them with us, But it is really lovely to have them with us as little talismans, or, like an acorn in your pocket, or all the things which happen. Like if you're a plant person, you can't go on a walk out in nature without coming back with something, and that's going to be in your pocket for about 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and I love that because obviously when you're on the go, you can't necessarily bring a physical thing, even though maybe a little aromatherapy bottle or something like that can fit in your pocket. But I really love the idea that you can carry nature just in the form of memory and those experiences that you have. And as you're saying that, I was instantly recalling meditations that I have, or when I take myself into meditation, I often imagine myself in my heart, and almost always there is some form of nature visualized, and more often than not it's actually a place I haven't physically seen. In reality they're just sort of imaginary scapes, or perhaps that's another philosophical debate as to what is reality and what is not. But yeah, even in these dream states, nature infuses them and inspires us and speaks to us in magical ways. And it's been really lovely to hear your magical connection with plants. And I could speak to you for hours, Faye, and we'll have to have you on again for another chat on the Wanderlust Herbal podcast at some point. But for the time being, I'd just like to ask if there's any way that people who might be tuning in can connect with your work, or where they can find out more about your books and your garden and all the things.
Oh, thanks, Fiona. So yeah, if you go to my website, which is fayjohnston.com, you can see details of the retreats that I run here and the gardens. You can also find information about my books. They're in all the usual places. And yeah, the one to start with is called Plants That Speak, Souls That Sing. That would be the one to start with. And yeah, join me on Substack. You can find me on Substack. It's called Soul Awakenings with Fay Johnstone, and that is where you can receive updates about things which are happening, as well as joining my monthly online sacred space where we do seasonal celebrations and plant medicine and healing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Faye, and look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully the next time.
Okay, bye, thanks.
Bye.